Welcome, everybody, to Surprised by Art. My name is Kirk, and I'm going to surprise all of you with a poem today. And over here we have...
Well, my name is Luke, and I'm the author of Touching the Art, A Guide to Enjoying Art at a Museum. And I'm going to surprise you, Kirk, with a sculpture. And you know what, Kirk? I'm not just going to surprise you, but we also have a special guest here today that I'm going to surprise as well. I want to introduce Kelsey Landon. Kelsey,
Hey.
Say hi to everybody out there. Oh, and she's giving a shout out.
All right.
I'm Kelsey Landon. I'm a sculptor, and I'm going to surprise you with some art as well.
All right.
Okay, all right, yes.
Someone just raised the enthusiasm level of the whole room. I like it. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
So, just very briefly about Kelsey. I've known you for how many years? For, I guess, 5-6 years. And we first met over a sculpture that you created that I fell in love with. And then from there, we've kind of kept up a bit of an artistic friendship relationship and shared ideas. And I love what you have to say about art. I love your art. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Now, you picked out the 3 topics that were posted on the Facebook group that were voted on.
Yeah.
And the selected topic was self-creation.
That's fantastic.
Oh,
Yeah, that's an interesting
a great
one.
topic.
Yeah, I like that topic a lot. I really thought about that this last week, and it's one that I've thought about for, my whole adult life. I think it's an important topic. So good choices. Your other ones were great too. You chose passion.
Passion
and that was
discrimination.
Discrimination, and passion definitely had a close second up. So
Yeah.
it was a good set of choices.
People would pick passion because that seems to be the thing I look for most frequently in artworks. But self-creation has that. There can be passion in self-creation as well.
Exactly.
So there might be some more to
And discrimination. You could discriminate against what you've created about yourself.
Yeah, we'll definitely discriminate during this podcast.
Oh, good. Yes. Okay. But not in the artworks, because the artworks are perfect. We can never judge an artwork negatively, right? I'm kidding. So
Kelsey,
self-creation though.
Yeah.
So what did you think, Luke, or Kelsey, why did you choose self-creation?
Okay, because of Gina Gorlin, actually. She, the psychologist, she wrote an article recently in a blog post, and she talked about self-creation, and I realized that it was the theme of the most recent sculpture series I did without even realizing it. I hadn't thought of it that way. Everything came to me in a more concrete way, but when I heard her talk about self-creation, it made me realize, oh, well, that's literally what's happening. And that is the theme of this sculpture. So,
Yeah.
So it's been on my mind simply because of Gina and in this series.
Was there anything specific in the blog post and her viewpoints on it that resonated with you in your artwork?
She talked about it was actually something personally that resonated with me. She talked about going into the unknown, and that's an opportunity for self-creation. And I hadn't been thinking of it that way. I am trying to support myself off of the sale of my artwork online and carve out a niche for myself in the internet. And that's a new thing that's happening in the world now because of the internet. We can do this kind of thing. So it's an unknown, and I've been mostly seeing it as a terror, as scary,
Yes.
and, a lot of anxiety producing. But when she framed it as an opportunity for self-creation, it just completely flipped how I was thinking of the next few years of my life.
Yeah. I think this is interesting on self-creation because for a long time, I've seen a lot of people some intellectuals were denigrating social media and saying that social media is not real life or Twitter's not real life. I don't know if you heard that kind of thing, which I really didn't like because I think it is real life and it's an aspect of real life. And like you're saying, there is a component that could be both negative or positive where you get the opportunity to kind of create yourself and the image that you're going to be fostering out in the world, right? It's like you're going to pick these types of pictures. Now it could be bad where it's everything is beautiful about your life and nobody sees the negative, and that could be bad, but you do get to kind of cultivate this image and you create a kind of self. Now, Whether that's a full self, that's another question, but it does have that opportunity. It is, done that as a new feature of humanity.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that's has nothing to do with, actually it kind of does. I was thinking of how my sculpture series came into being. It's 6 figures. And I have for a while, I actually had even talked to Luke about this a few years ago. I've had a problem with sculpture for a long time. And the problem is that you only get one moment. You get one moment in a sculpture. And I've wanted a way to, how do you put time into a sculpture? And I've tried different things like sculpting different perspectives and different facial features. So it looks like the head is shaking, no. Like I've tried different emotions so that as you walk around the sculpture, the emotions change on the person in front of you. So I've tried different things like that, but it just made me realize I could do sculptures that were next to each other and show an evolution. And at the same time, I was thinking about, I love comparing art forms, which is clearly probably why Luke thought of me for this. And I was thinking of music, and my favorite thing in music, to put it most abstractly, is when there's tension and then release. And at this time, when I was sculpting this, I was going through a pretty severe depression because I was still adjusting to my bipolar medications. I had only recently discovered I was bipolar, and I had also just discovered that my dad had cancer. And it was a very upsetting time. He's now had surgery and recovered, and so he's doing well. But this was a very dark place for me, and I needed, with a lot of tension, and I needed to get to a place of acceptance and release. So with that in mind, that's where this came from. And the self-creation aspect was in, I wanted my soul to go through changes. I wanted to go from tension to release. Yeah. And so that's where this came from.
Shall I take a look at it?
Yes, yeah. Let me pop it up on here so people could see. All right, here's the artwork. Now, this is the first time I've seen this, by the way.
So what are you seeing,
30
Kirk?
Seconds ago.
What are you seeing, Kirk? I've only glanced at it before, and so I can describe a little bit of what I'm seeing now. I'm seeing 6 different phases of movement, or 6 different body positions, going from crouching to standing to then to falling backwards, and they're not all natural body positions. The first one, crouching, reminds me of that painting I shared with you, Kirk, for Aloneness, a young nude man on top of that cliff, and then it looks like she's getting up. So Kelsey, I can see that sense of time that you're putting into this, but it feels less like a time that's that you can measure, and more like the time of a soul that is growing and evolving, and something that
it's not supposed to be 6 seconds or something. Actually, of course, this is supposed to be a journey. These are stages of consciousness, is how I see it.
Well, and the shadows are really interesting too. In this particular photo, I assume that is important, like that was done purposefully, because I really like this second one, especially where it feels like you're saying, Luke, the aloneness one, where there's, and it's more than aloneness, because for me, I feel a little bit of despair in the body posture, putting the head down, the arms. Like if I feel myself in that position, it's like when I'm a kid and I want to hide from the world for a moment. Yeah. But then there's that moment when it's like you look up for a second, and yet she's still in the shadow. And that's what I see in the second one, although she's a little hard to see because it's in shadow. So
it is hard to see, but if you look closely, you can see her ankles are crossed and her arms are crossed, and it's gone from this to this, but she is looking up, and that's very key.
Yeah. And so it's like she's peeking out to see if it's safe, is the kind of feeling that I get. And it's still pretty dark, but then, the next one is, there's kind of like this, there's obviously a movement, like a moment when she exploded into action in a sense, but she's still very curled into herself,
holding on to me.
Yeah. And she's still like not ready to explore the world properly or fully, is kind of what I see. And then obviously there's the second and third one, the fourth and the fifth one. And the fifth one, she's completely open. And even being naked, I think, emphasizes that right? Where it's like she's completely open. She's not conscious of even her body. She's just kind of letting it go and being part of the world. So it's, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen I mean, I know a lot of statues, there are series, but I've never seen
it
this.
before
Yeah,
either.
I've never seen it like
So
this.
I'm super excited because I think I actually did something original for once in my life.
So Kelsey, I'm wondering, when you created this, were you trying to think of the particular moments in what you were going through that might match up with each of the phases of body postures?
It wasn't specific, like I found out my dad has cancer. It wasn't as specific as that. It was more like this process. It was about the process of this happening, and this process is a universal kind of experience. Like, we've all been in a darkness and in a depression, and you feel a sense of isolation, and you need to put your head down, and you don't even want to face the world, and you're just trying to brace yourself for what is happening. And the question, what I did is I said, I want to go from tension to release. I want to go from you can't face the world to you're completely open and part of the world. So what are the steps that get you there? That's what I asked. And the first thing is to have a vision, to and also you should know each one of these is named after like an element. So the first one is called slate, and it just because the feeling matched like this, the straightness and the cutness and the flatness of it, like the bareness of it, the lifelessness of it, just matched that one. And the next one is called crystal, and it was sort of like you imagine a better place of being, and you want to protect yourself, and you want to stay covered, and you want to stay in that little cocoon you've made, but you also have a vision of a better way of being. And the next one is fire, and it's kind of rising, where you've gotten yourself out of that stage, and you're you're pulling yourself up almost, but yet still protecting yourself. And then the next one was earth, and I imagined that almost like a jump, like defying gravity and literally pushing against the earth, because like there's a huge amount of effort involved when you're trying to make life changes like this, and there's a lot of things pulling against you. And the next one is called air, and it's sort of like that moment when it's starting to pull you instead of you pushing so hard. And it might even be, you might even feel pulled back, but you're starting to fight it less. And also this is the moment when, like you said, she's completely open. She's not protecting her body, and her nakedness does exaggerate that. And then the next one is water. And that for me was the feeling of total acceptance and relief, where she's basically floating.
Oh, right. And I'm going to have to, punch myself because I had our little faces on Zoom. Oh, I didn't even see that last one. So I apologize. The water one. So, now that I'm saying it, it emphasizes it more. And I really am curious about this fourth figure. That's
the one that melted, and I have to redo it.
Oh no, not in the picture. It didn't melt. In real life, it melted.
Real life, it melted. Left it in my car, and it was, yeah.
But so, can you just explain the positioning? Like, trying to think about, is she stretching, trying to get ready for the next moment?
Well, it's more like go from the third to the fourth.
Yeah,
and it's almost like she wants to stay holding on, and her other arm is like, no. And
I see.
And then the
it's
legs
like this,
or where you're jumping off. Yeah, it's
interesting.
You're stopping yourself from maintaining that position, like pulls it off.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm seeing here, Kelsey, is a dance. And oftentimes I think of sculpture as not necessarily capturing a real life moment, which I do a lot with paintings, where you look at, okay, here's a moment that's kind of reflected in my life. I think for a couple of these body poses, I've never taken them in my life. But if I put myself in that pose, the response of my body to that, the emotional response that I'll feel in my body from that pose is going to give me that kind of feeling that you're trying to communicate, the tension or the release. And so I'm very curious now to share this sculpture that I've got for you guys to see what you think of it. And maybe there might be some parallels. I'm very curious to see what you think. So I'll talk a little bit about my journey with picking out this artwork, because I went back and forth with self-discovery and what that was. And one of the things I found is a lot of the artworks that I went to pick out for self-discovery were artworks with children in them. Children figuring out the world for themselves. One is, of a girl who's reading a big book and would rather not do her knitting. The other one is of a kid who drew on the wall because he wants to be an artist and he's getting scolded for drawing on the wall, but it's a kind of process of self-discovery and starting to try things out to create their self. But that's not what really interested me with this. And I get it with teaching, and when I think back to when I was a kid, or the moment I decided I wanted to be a teacher, I had this revelatory moment. But right now in my life, where I'm 40 years old, and a lot of what I am is what I am, and the wiggle room for going off and becoming somebody new or creating yourself, that's challenging. I started to think, okay, what does it mean for an adult, for myself, to create myself? And I thought of two ways. One is in the choices I make, and the other it's in the habits I create. And most of that comes in the work I choose to do and in the relationships I choose to have. And a little bit like your experience, Kelsey, it's hard. It's hard if you have a vision of one direction you want to go in, and then you have all of this that's still with you that you might want to push beyond.
Yeah.
So, are you guys ready to see this
Let's
sculpture?
do it.
All right. Now, host, looks like you need to allow me to be able to share screen. Perfect. All right. So, Kelsey, I'll ask you to jump in first, and then Kirk. And if you guys want to just start off each with like a quick title for this artwork. All right. So I'm going to
let Kelsey go first because I'm always the one on the line.
All right. Here it is.
Oh, interesting. I never would have.
Okay. What's it?
I'm so glad you picked this.
Yeah, what's your quick title?
What's the question for me, or what?
What's your quick title? What's your immediate first reaction?
Oh, but I know it so well already.
All right, then Kirk, what's your quick title?
I already know the title.
Okay, I'll try and then make myself look like a fool.
Great. That's why we have you here, Kirk.
I mean, I have this word, but I came from Kelsey, so I don't know if it's because of that or.
Use it.
But strain. Or constraint,
awesome.
Hold down or something like,
wonderful.
So
and I've got several images. So maybe Kirk, because you're unfamiliar with it, can you just very briefly describe what it is that you're seeing that's making you think constrain?
Well, I mean, it's way bigger than I thought.
He's tied tight.
Oh, he's tied behind. Okay. So it looks like he's got his arms. It's a statue or a sculpture, and he's got his arms tied behind him. There's a strap across his chest. And his head is in a really weird back, like his neck is back and to the left, I guess. And then
what is this? Is this JFK? Back and to the left, back?
I don't know. Like when he got shot?
Oh, the reference, when he was shot, there's the Zapruder, the Zapruder film, his back and to the left.
Oliver Stone movie, yeah.
All right, bad reference. Sorry, I broke the
yes, it's just like he got shot in the head, exactly. But he has his arm. So at first I thought when I first saw it, I thought the sculptor had sculpted his hand in a weird way, but apparently his arm is just tied behind him so uncomfortably, and he's got his trapezoid muscle. Like, oh my God, it looks like it's really painful actually. Like I can't even do that. Like it's just yeah, and he looks really uncomfortable. So he looks like he's a prisoner. of some sort, and or like a prisoner of war. That's mainly what I'm getting at the moment.
That's great. That's great. So Kelsey,
Mhm.
you're familiar with this artwork. Have you ever seen it in person?
No, I would love to. I've been trying to go to Italy for forever.
So what
So
Do you
when
see
you're
the sculpture
seeing
in the
this,
background? That's my
yeah.
favorite sculpture of all time.
Oh, okay.
So it's a companion piece to
Mhm.
these. This is
I would die if I was
all.
in this room.
Yeah. So these are my photos, except for the first one
No
from
way.
the Louvre. Yeah. But
Wow.
Kelsey, before I talk about what I saw in it, my experience with it, why would you die to go see these sculptures, and especially this one? What do you
Am I allowed
see
to
in it? What
reveal
made you
anything I
think?
know about it?
Yeah, go ahead. Reveal
Well, okay,
everything you
this
know
is
about it.
Michelangelo's, he did a series of slaves. And um and it's interesting because slavery is one of the worst things that could ever happen to a human being. And yet in these moments of captivity or slavery, there's still such a life force inside of all of these sculptures. And there's for me, what it reminds me of is like, even in like the darkest of times and the darkest of moments, like life, and there's still beauty in life. And even in these moments you can find beauty. And I feel differently about this one than the dying slave one. They're quite different themes. I do have to say, this is his right thigh is one of my favorite, like my favorite thigh of all time. But I love it because well, it's called the Rebellious Slave. I already know that.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see that he's constrained, but not internally. He has not given up.
Well, he's fighting against the strains rather than pulling,
No.
but like letting the strains take over them, right? It feels like the strain. Am I correct in like it feels like he's like, if I were constrained, you could obviously just like kind of slump over and just give up. But he feels like like you're saying, there's a power where he's almost trying to break out of it. His muscles are bulging, and I'm a big fan of trap muscles. So his trap
It's
muscles.
not the first time you've
It's not the
mentioned
first time. You
trapezoids on this podcast.
know how many hours when I
huge
worked out,
devious
man.
and shoulder blade.
When I
Check
when
out
I'm
that
working
Perry's
out,
Major. See?
there you go. Yeah, and he's got like, he's powerful too. Like you could feel, he's muscular. He's not sallow. Like you might see some, abused slaves. Like there's a substance to him. I wish I could see his face a little bit clearer. Like I want to get right up there because I don't see despair in his face at the
No,
moment.
not at
Like,
all.
he's not given up. It's not like, it kind of makes me think of the poem Invictus. A little bit, right? Like
Recite it to us.
I used to have it memorized. It's been years. I'll have to get it.
My head is bloody but unbowed.
Yeah, I am the captain of my soul. I am the master of my fate as the ending. Yeah, but out of the darkness type thing.
Yeah, we'll play poetry.
Black as the night from pole to pole. I think whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. But
out of the fell clutch of circumstance,
Ooh, all right, keep going.
It's coming back to me.
Yeah,
No. Hey, you know what, Kelsey? I think I remember we there was a poetry recitation get together with your family at some restaurant in Pittsburgh that I think I remember, where we were reciting poetry, and that one would have come up.
Yeah.
And in the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the
my head is bloody yet unbowed.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's great. And Kirk, nice connection there. So I'll briefly tell about my experience, and then we'll go on to the poem that you picked out, Kirk. So, this was about 2 years ago when I went on a solo trip through, well, it wasn't so a family trip, but then I ended up at the Louvre in Paris by myself. And it said, okay, I've got an hour. Let me go to the Louvre. And I went to one room. I went to this room. I've seen these sculptures at the Louvre many times. So this was the first time that I said to myself, I'm just going to spend time with Michelangelo. And this was especially this one that I spent time with, because I started thinking not just of what kind of moment is he going through. It could say, you can think of the narrative. He's a slave and then he's struggling. Somebody's captured him and he's trying to get out of it. But more of, and not necessarily the symbolism, but more of the dance of it and what it does to my body to try to do what he's doing. And so I bet there are probably all kinds of visitors at the Louvre kind of looking over at me kind of with straight, wide eyes, strange looks, sideways glances, because here's this guy trying to contort his traps to look like what the rebellious slave is doing. And and it
makes your face like that.
Yeah,
this internal struggle that I was feeling is, I didn't realize it then, but thinking back to what self-creation is made me think this is the general feeling of sometimes what it feels like to try to make a hard decision, or to try to think about, okay, what are the competing things that are going on in my life, what society expects, what my family expects, and what should this be the battle that I pick, and is this really what is going to serve my cause, my happiness? Should I go ahead and take this opportunity? Should I turn it down? Should I raise a ruckus here or not? And all this struggle in trying to assert myself and therefore kind of create myself is hard. And it weighs, and sometimes it can get you really down, and sometimes it can crush you, and you could say, man, and you know what, when I've been feeling kind of this, I've been feeling a lot of this, especially recently, when there's a lot to think about in the world with everything politically going on, and there's a lot of personal stress going on. My art museum is not yet open, and I can't work there, and all kinds of other things, my relationship with my friends and so forth, and my family. And all this stress and all this challenging thinking that I've got to do can weigh me down. And sometimes I feel like, let me just play video games. And just to get away from it. But sometimes you gotta push yourself through it in order to think through things, to act through things, to create that self. And this is, there are all kinds of different steps and different ways to do it. Have the vision, seek some kind of support, create a habit, do all these different things. But the overall struggle and feeling, this sculpture seemed, and remembering the feeling of the sculpture at the Louvre seemed to capture that for me. So Kelsey, I see you taking the pose a little bit there.
It's interesting because it's like his torso is turning away from where he's looking. It's actually, just so you know, when you stand on one leg, if I stand on one leg, my like this, I naturally rotate in the direction of that.
Yeah.
And doesn't it look like his weight is primarily on his left leg?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
But his rib cage is not rotating towards it. It's going in the opposite direction. That is extremely difficult to do. And it's so, there's so much more tension. He's pulling away from what is natural.
Do you think he's trying to break through the straps? Like he's trying to, like when I was looking. His arms back there are what's tied, and that's what's stopping him. But what I love is where he's looking, and it's completely in the opposite direction. Like he is not looking at his bonds. He's not looking at what's stopping him. That's not even like, look how focused he's on where he wants to go. Yeah. I love that. Like when you're talking about all this struggling that we're doing recently, I think that I can remember this to just remind myself of like, sometimes you don't need to focus on what you're struggling with. You need to focus on what you want, because I think that's what I can forget when all of this really good pain happens in COVID and all, all these things that we're dealing with. It's so hard. And all I can think about is how hard it is. But what do I want out of this life? Yeah.
And that sometimes that you forget about that.
Kelsey, before we transition to poetry, may I ask one more quick question?
Yeah.
So with what you've described about this artwork, do you see it being comparable to one of the 6 phases that you have in yours and Numa?
It's interesting because possibly there's similarities in the 4th one, because that's where she's like pushing against gravity, and that would be similar to him pushing against his restraints. And it's certainly 4 or before.
Awesome.
So the first one I think of is the 4th one, because that's where
he hasn't
directly pushing against a physical restraint.
He's not where he wants to be yet, for sure. Like, he could see it and maybe he's working toward it, but he's still struggling against whatever he's struggling against.
And one thing I want to say about that sculpture is it's also interesting, not just who he is as a slave and what he's going through. It's interesting that Michelangelo saw slaves that way. That's what's interesting to me, is that he saw so much beauty and power in one of the most, horrific, not forms of humanity, but like an enslaved person. Like, he still saw so much humanity
in a dehumanizing state.
Yeah, in a dehumanized, exactly. And I think that's kind of beautiful that he could see that.
No, that's great.
There.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So a poem, and I've got to admit that Kirk gave me a sneak peek of what this poem is, but we haven't given you a sneak peek, Kelsey. Okay. So Kirk, will you share with us your poem and read it to us, and we'll enjoy your mellifluous voice?
It is sharing the wrong screen for some reason.
We could see it. We could see it.
Oh, you can?
See. Yep.
Right now you're seeing the poem?
Badger Clark. Mm-hmm.
The Westerner by Badger Clark.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, because it's showing me something different, but that's fine by me, as long as you guys see it. All right, so here's The Westerner by Badger Clark. And I don't think this needs any setup, so I think we could just go right into it and then discuss it afterward.
My fathers sleep on the sunrise plains.
Oh, wait, Kelsey, we'll let Kirk read it.
Well, if you want to, I'm fine with having a guest reader. Do you want to read it?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
My fathers sleep on the sunrise plains, and each one sleeps alone. Their trails made dim to the grass and rains, for I choose to make my own. I lay proud to their blood and name, but I lean on no dead kin. My name is mine for the praise or scorn, and the world began when I was born, and the world is mine to win. They built high towns on their old log sills, where the great slow rivers gleamed. But with new live rock from the savage hills, I'll build as they only dreamed. The smoke scarce dies where the trail camp lies, till the rails glint down the pass. The desert springs into fruit and wheat, and I lay the stones of a solid street over yesterday's untrod grass. I waste no thought on my neighbor's birth or the way he makes his prayer. I grant him a white man's room on earth if his game is only square. While he plays it straight, I'll call him mate. If he cheats, I'll drop him flat. Old class and rank are a worn out lie, for all clean men are as good as I, and a king is only that. I dream no dreams of a nursemaid state that will spoon feed me out my food. A stout heart sings in the fray with fate, and the shock and the sweat are good. From the noon to noon, all the earthly boon that I ask my God to spare is a little daily bread and store, with the room to fight and the strong for more, and the weak shall get their share. The sunrise plains are a tender haze, and the sunset seas are gray. But I stand here where the bright skies blaze over me and the big today. What good to me is a vague maybe, or a mournful might have been. For the sun wheels swift from morn to morn, and the world began when I was born, and the world is mine to win.
Nice.
Wow.
Very good. So I assume you've heard that poem before.
No.
You've never heard that poem before?
No.
Oh, okay.
That's very beautiful.
Okay,
I've
yeah.
heard that last line, the world is mine to win, but I don't know if that's just a thing people say or if that's where I heard it from.
Yeah, I don't know where that originated, if it originated here, but I've heard some similar things to that. So usually what we do is we kind of go, section through section. I know, Luke, you knew this poem before today.
Yeah, I know this poem
I think a
rather
lot of
well.
our audience may.
And it's one I've taught a few times.
Yeah, you've taught it a couple times.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll just briefly summarize my first take on the poem. It's been a while since I've read it. So if I were to put it in my own words real quick about what this poem is saying, it's saying something like, I'm not going to follow what my forefathers have done. I'm going to create a new life for myself.
Yeah.
I'll build on what they did, but I'm going to strike off on my own with my own vision. So does that sound like your take, Kelsey?
That's exactly the main feeling that I got out of it.
And I'm a big fan of Western movies. It's one of the reasons I think I love this poem. This is, called cowboy poetry. And it's definitely about that. And you could break it down into how he sees one of the things I really like about it is he's not, saying, I hate the past, I'm going to build something new despite them. He puts them in the sunrise plains, which I kind of compare to the Elysium fields of the Greeks, where it's like, this is what, the people came before me, they're heroes. They really built something amazing, but their trail camp, the smoke is over there. I picture him like out in the desert and he's looking out at the steel of the railroad going one way. He's looking at the camp that way. He's like, I'm going to build a town. I'm going to build an empire. I'm going to build this world, in this area, and it's going to be my world. And that's one of the reasons. And so for me, about the self-creation aspect, I think
very self-creation.
Yeah, I think, and especially like you're thinking of those lines, and the world began when I was born and the world is mine to win. I mean, it's something that I think about a lot and why I love poetry, especially. And it reminds me of a quote from Ayn Rand, who this was her favorite poem, actually, on the Tom Snyder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is Ayn Rand's very favorite poem. And on Tom Snyder's show, she didn't mention this poem, but she had a quote in this TV interview where she was asked about like when you die and afterlife and things like that. And she says,
quoting the Greek.
Yeah, she like some Greek philosopher she couldn't remember, but she says, I'm not afraid to die because, so I'm paraphrasing, because I'm not going to die. The world is going to end.
Or when I die, the world dies with me.
Something like that. And, a lot of people like find that, and I've always tried to wrap my head around that because it's like, wait, this is like the arch objective reality person where it's like the world is the world. What are you talking about? But the more I've thought about it, the more it's like, as I get older, I'm 35 and, I've built my own values, my own world. That's my world, right? Like when I see something, a movie, I react to it a little bit differently than you might. When I see a certain sunrise, it might react to it a little bit. So there is an objective world, but my world is still mine. And so I'm, through our lives, through our experiences and reading, in my view, we start to develop our own. We build from scratch, from a baby that has no concepts, no visions, no anything. We build this whole world. And that, I think, is the spirit that this is capturing, is this self-creating of that world.
So I've got a question to follow up with that. I'm seeing a lot of the building in this poem. Let me go out into the West and create something new. So what part of the poem is more focusing on the self-creation rather than in the external creating something in the world? But
isn't that how you ultimately self-create? Can you truly self-create if you change nothing in the external world?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. Like, so even if you want to improve certain, abstract values, in my view, you have to do it through action in the world, right? You can't just sit on your couch and change yourself. If you're going to change yourself, like if you're going to be more disciplined, you can't study what discipline is and read it in a book. You have to get up early every day and, work on your craft, for 5 hours, and then, then read a book to better yourself and take a video course and commit yourself to doing that every day. And that's how you get better at it. So I do think that there's a combination where you have to do both in order to create yourself.
All right. Granted, there's a combination.
Internal creation is psychological. And that's where I have found I've had the least amount of control in, because at first I didn't quite choose what my ideas were. I listened to what my parents and peers said. And then I was around 16 and I realized, oh, how do I actually know any of this to be true? And I started challenging my ideas. And then I do take full responsibility for what is in my brain at this point. But it took me significantly longer psychologically to start tackling that from a self-creation standpoint. I had to learn cognitive behavioral therapy. And there's a significant amount of you that's been created either through your lack of self-awareness or just the things you've done or the things that have happened to you during childhood and during life. A lot of what is inside of you is because of what is around you in whatever world you're born into. And so to try to figure out, how do I change those psychological mechanisms, those habits that, that's the habit part of what you were talking about. That is an internal part. And there isn't as much of a parallel in physically changing your reality with that. There is, because you usually ultimately want it to come into action. But a lot of that is learning how to watch your thoughts instead of being run by them, or watch your emotions and say, do I want to act on that? Or do I want to choose a different path? That's the most powerful way I've internally self-created.
Kelsey, would you see the Michelangelo sculpture as being more psychological then than the Westerner poem?
Oh, for sure. I don't think he meant that literally. Like, no slave ever actually stood like that. No slave ever actually did that. It wasn't about rebellious slave. Those were definitely not meant to be taken literally. I don't think so.
Here's a follow-up question to that. Is there a moment in the poem that matches with the rebellious slave? Or are they apples and oranges? Are they two different?
It's interesting because they're focused. This is a very sunny picture of self-creation. This poem, it seems like it's very positive and he's very optimistic, and there isn't a lot of self-doubt or, a lot of struggle that he was talking about that I particularly see.
There's definitely not self-doubt. He does say that he likes the struggle, though, right? So that he wants.
You go to that place?
Yeah, it's. I kind of highlighted it here. A stout heart sings in the fray with fate, and the shock and sweat are good. From noon to noon, all the earthly boon that I ask my God to spare is a little daily bread in store, and the room to fight the strong for more, and the weak shall get their share. And so he's not struggling in the moment that he's saying this. But one of the things that I like about this poem is that, like you guys were talking about earlier, is there's a relationship between the values that he's, talking about and the external world. So, this first one is about admiration and admiring the people who came before you while still, talking about your own egoism and your own self and how you're going to self. And he talks about like in this section, one of the values is he values the struggle. He values what's difficult, and he's asking, that I don't expect anything. He talks earlier about, or maybe it's later. Where is it? The nanny. We talked about the nanny state, right? He doesn't want a nanny state. He doesn't want anybody to take care of him. He doesn't want, and he also talks about how he doesn't care about you as where you came from or anything other than, so his value is individualism. This is stark individualism. It's like, if you're going to be on the plane next to me and you got your, how many acres, you can do whatever you want. I waste no thought on my neighbor's birth or the way he makes his prayer. And then the next line, of course, I think is the most controversial, which, whether you think it's racist or not is difficult discussion, but where he says, I grant him a white man's room on earth.
Talk about discrimination.
Yeah, some discrimination there for sure. But I do think that the overall view is that, again, he's on these plains, on this, like, out in the frontier of America on the West, and anybody's welcome there. It doesn't matter if you're from Africa, if you're from Asia, if you're, from Europe. It doesn't matter where you're from. I don't care what you've done or what you do, but you got to play the game of, the nanny state and the values that he's kind of espousing here. Respect the people that built before us, but build your own world, right? That's what he expects from you. They built high towns on their old log sills where the great slow rivers gleamed, but with new live rock from the savage hills, I'll build as they only dreamed. That's what he expects from people, is that's what you should do. And if you play it straight, if you adhere to these values, you can enter into my world. And so there's a kind of that combination. But he's definitely not in the same struggle at the moment.
On the same position of life, for sure.
Yeah, he's definitely not in the same position of life.
I actually think this person is taking a bit for granted, and maybe it's not taking it for granted, but this is an open, free world that he's coming into contact with. And that's not a given. But it's so internalized into him, he can't even really, it doesn't seem he can't imagine the world could ever be any other way. And I think that's a beautiful mindset to be in. But
think of it this way. If that Michelangelo's slave does snap out of it and escape, could you imagine him on the West? If he finally got to America, let's say, would this represent his feelings?
That's exactly the point that I am trying to make, that world that he was born into is different. And it's kind of an exception throughout human history. And there haven't been that many opportunities. And I know, like, coming out of like that dark ages in like 1700 BC, it was kind of like the Western era in Greece, as I see it, like, because they were able to have their own land. They were able to have like their own homes and farm it. And you could keep whatever you created. And you got to build your life and your world in whatever way you saw fit. There haven't been that many time periods where this has actually happened. And it's so internalized in this person who is writing this poem.
No, I agree. And it's, oh, go ahead.
It's just sweet. It's like he sees the world as such a beautiful place. And I feel like we don't live in that world right now. We can't go populate an island and start our own country.
Yeah. No, I agree.
The land has been grabbed at this point. And maybe not Mars. Maybe that's where we can have our new land.
I've talked about this on the show a couple of times. I love the Bezos philosophy where he says one of the reasons he's not interested in Mars, he's interested in just putting people in space, is because he has this vision of, he wants to have, like, he thinks it's a beautiful thing to have 3 trillion humans in the galaxy, which space can inhabit that. Like, there's enough room in space for that. And there's a kind of, and Mars has the same kind of feeling of the frontier, which of course motivates Elon Musk. And I think there is something wonderful about that. And, and thinking about that slave, when you guys talked about his inner power, that I think, because we don't know what this guy who was born here, what he actually went through, right? Like, he could have gone through something terrible, escaped Europe and came here, and he's only acknowledging the people in America who built log sills, right? He's going to build stone sills, right? He's adhering to them not because they birthed him, but because ideologically, because spiritually, they did the same thing he did, which was escape, right? Or at least it could be that way. It doesn't say that in the poem, but when I compare it to the slave, I get that kind of feeling that, if the slave escaped, he's going to go through hell and high water to get here so he can live this life.
Oh yeah, he's like, you could imagine looking at this type of vision.
Yeah, and giving him motivation to, like, that's what he's looking at. It's like, I'm going to get to the West after this is done.
By the way, I guess I'll admit this, but I've had problems with that sculpture. I don't fully love every part of it. And I'm not completely sure why. And it might be because it's sort of a negative moment that's being portrayed. It might be that, but like, it makes me uncomfortable. That's how I feel when I look at it. It's like,
Kelsey, are you thinking of that discomfort in relation to the poem, or what is it?
the sculpture.
When you're thinking of the sculpture, is that discomfort heightened when you think of the sunny mood of the poem?
It contrasts with it greatly, because
and
it's
so that arouses the discomfort. Is that
no? This discomfort I have always felt towards that sculpture, and it's interesting contrasting this poem with it, because this is a very sunny, very optimistic poem by someone who is clearly not enslaved and would not tolerate that.
Definitely not. And
I think I might feel bad for the rebellious slave. I'm not sure if it's that, but I've always loved conflict in sculpture, but there's something about how he's feeling or what's going on in this moment. It irks me, and I actually don't know why.
Well, that's great. I love it.
Yeah, so, I think that's interesting too, because he's not getting out of those straps. Maybe one feeling like he may look there, but at the end of the day, he's trapped in that system, and that's it. Like, even if I
don't feel hopeful for him.
Yeah,
I don't
no
think
hope.
He's gonna get out of them.
He's got power.
His body is almost forming in the shape with the straps, almost like.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the right way to break those restraints.
Yeah, like the way his body's contorted in such a uncomfortable, impossible way, almost.
It's that's not how I would try to break out of them. Like maybe one moment, but it's.
And maybe he's not trying to break out of. Maybe
it
I'm
might
wrong.
be Michelangelo's issue. He might not. Yes, exactly. He might not be trying to break out of it. He might just be tortured, conflicted.
Yeah.
But yet there's that look on his face of like.
So you were describing the face before, the head before, as looking away from the contortion of his body, as if he were looking out at something.
That's a good thing, and maybe that's what a problem I have with it, though, because like you're trapped. Like, be more upset about it. Like,
so here's another question for you, Kelsey, regarding the sculpture.
Can I bring a sculpture that this just reminded me of? One of my favorite sculptures, Nathan Hale.
Yeah,
he's also with the.
You're talking about Nathan Hale by Frederick McManus. Is that correct?
Yeah,
it's Friedrich McManus.
It's one where I only have one life to give, or I'm right, that one.
I regret that I have but one life to give for my country.
Yeah, and there's a kind of nobility to his.
I don't feel the type of conflict I feel when I look at the rebellious slave.
Yeah.
There's something different about it, but they're both enslaved. Would you call that Friedrich McManus thing? Would you see a similar form of self-creation, Luke, in that Friedrich McManus? Would you have considered picking that?
As part of self-creation, I'm not sure. You can interpret it as an act of self-creation. What I've seen it more as is an act of principled acceptance of a fate you can't deny. You know what? Nothing. I can't resist this, so give it to me, because it is symbolic of what I am fighting for. I think I'm drawn more to the Michelangelo as self-creation because of the experience I had with it, where it was a visceral feel, more fundamental than the kind of moment that Nathan Hale is experiencing. It was a visceral feel of the difficulty that asserting yourself can take. And the Nathan Hale, is a little bit more like the Westerner,
Yes.
where, you know what?
His chin is up a little bit.
What is that line that you highlighted, Kirk, about the shock and sweat are good?
Yeah, so it's 1 second. A stout heart sings in the fray with fate, and the shock and sweat are good.
So you can imagine Nathan Hale saying, a stout heart
good.
sings.
100%.
Yeah.
No,
And
that's a great comparison. And a sculpture that would capture the spirit of the Westerner a little bit more than the Michelangelo statue. Yeah, I think the Michelangelo statue is you are living in the difficulty of it.
Yeah,
and it's not looking at what's coming afterwards and what's hopeful in the next
step. Does it make you think of
He's looking at it.
Yeah.
What he's doing is not what he wants to be doing.
Kirk, what were you saying?
Have you guys ever seen the movie The Gladiator? Russell Crowe? The Rebellious Slave makes me think of that in terms of how you were talking about the self-creation part. In terms of, he's a general who becomes a slave, who becomes a gladiator, who challenges, right? He's creating different selves in order to get to his final, and he's in the struggle that entire time, right? He's like, it starts off where he's on a high and he's a general and just wants to get home, but there, obviously he's captured and then he's turned into this slave, and then that slave has to rise up, and he's creating himself in I guess, when you were talking about that earlier about the struggle as self-creation, that's the movie that I was thinking about.
So this might be a topic for another podcast, but I think that, because I thought of that, okay, the creating the self that you present to other people, and Pygmalion does this, My Fair Lady, and there are probably all kinds of movies about this. I think even what the Hunger Games has a big element of this, and I deliberately didn't go that route because I wanted to go a route of more of what is the self that I'm creating that's more mine, that I'm putting out in the world, rather than the one that is what appears to others, like General Maximus, where he is, "Are you not entertained?" where he becomes the person that's going to be the emperor that everybody rallies around. So creating this persona. But that seems like it's a whole other topic that we could get into another time. Any final thoughts on self-creation with these works?
I'm still trying to figure out Michelangelo's piece and also my reaction to it. I still don't quite understand why it literally makes me viscerally uncomfortable when I let myself, I can just look at the anatomy of it. I can see it from that perspective. But when I feel him as a human, I just feel so physically uncomfortable.
Kelsey, I think I have a question. I think I have a question that might help, and I'll be curious to see if it does help, and maybe it's not a question that can be answered completely now, but maybe later on. If you were sculpting the Rebellious Slave and you were there with Michelangelo, or maybe Michelangelo said, "Hey, take over, Kelsey," what would you change about it to add the twist that would make you feel less uncomfortable?
I would have him looking at something on Earth, not something up. And I would have made his eye sharper.
What about if there was like a little strand of the strap breaking just a little bit? I'm not an artist, I don't know.
Yeah. Some form of hope like that. I actually do have a chained up person idea, and there is a form of it's a Prometheus idea, and there's Athena there. I actually won't tell you in case I make this one day, but it's a huge, epic, 6-figure sculpture. I hope I can do it one day, so I won't tell you anything about it in case I do. But no, I would want to see more hope, because it's so focused on the struggle, and the struggle is so hard, and the struggle isn't what it's about. This is just what's making it hard for him. But I want to believe that what he's looking at, he's going to achieve, and he's looking too high for me.
That's interesting. No, looking at Earth and kind of narrowing his eyes a little bit more to indicate that there is something specific that he is going to get or going after that's realistic.
I
rather
feel like
than,
he's asking.
That's interesting.
He's looking to God. Is that what you're saying?
Something.
Basically?
And funny, I didn't even notice that didn't bothered me until you asked me how I would have sculpted it differently. I had no idea I had a problem with that, but there's nothing up there.
Well,
so
he thinks
you're either looking in here or you're looking.
Do you think it matters
there.
that? Do you think,
up there?
But do you think it matters that he thinks there's something up there?
And well, that's
in
interesting.
terms of creating
then doesn't that mean he's asking for help?
Well, but sometimes, I mean, if you're creating yourself, do you think it's not
looking at his own soul?
Well, what do you mean looking at his own soul?
Like if he's looking, so if it's a spiritual thing and he's looking at something up there and he thinks something is up there, is he looking at his own self?
What I mean, or maybe. I mean, what if it's something like he is, one of the things that allows us to create ourselves, in my view, is admiration, is emulation, is looking at other people as a model to emulate, to be better, right? Like I want, Kobe Bryant talked about how he looked up to Michael Jordan, and he didn't like to be compared to Michael Jordan, or he didn't like to say he was greater than Michael Jordan, because he said, I wouldn't be who I am without having admired and looked up to Michael Jordan. He pushed me to be better than I was. And so in this moment of this slave, this rebellious slave, maybe he's looking up and saying that that's the alternative, or the world that I'm going to be getting away from, this world of the earth, which is strap and pulling me down, and I'm going to be looking up. There's a series of poems by William Blake called Songs of Innocence and Experience, and there's several of them which are very much about this theme, where you have these, for instance, kids, there's one called The Little Black Boy, which is about a slave boy in London or in England, and his mother, who was, also captured in the southern wilds, he calls it Africa. And she's telling him a myth about why they're so different than everybody else. And the concept and the idea is that the myth, even though the myth is wrong and it's completely, a bad myth in a sense, the idea though is to give him the fuel and courage to keep moving on, right? Because without it, he's completely going to be destroyed and on his own, right? And everybody else is against, because all he sees is like everybody else who's white. He's like one of the few black people. He's like this black little boy. He doesn't understand. And so he has this myth to help create. Now, we could talk about, at another episode, that myth being good or bad and what it can do. But I'm just saying, I think there's some element of that. And
you think he's looking at something he admires or aspires to be?
Well, like God, God's strength, and I'm getting power from strength from God.
I could see that, but what he's looking at definitely would affect how I feel about the sculpture, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so Kelsey, where can we find you? I know you're a TikTok celebrity.
Oh yeah.
And so anybody out there who wants to find you creating things and all kinds of other videos, what's your, I don't know, there's a TikTok handle or something? At
Landon Art. I also have Instagram, and that's Landon Art Official. And I also have a website, kelseylandon.com.
And that's KELSYLANDIN.
Yes.
Landon, got it.
Yep.
Great.
Kelsey, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your art, surprising us with that, and for sharing with us your perspective on the poem and the sculpture.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing them up. Like, I'm all charged up and fired. I'm ready to go for like 2 more hours now.
Wow.
All right.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Kirk.